Welcome to the 7th class of TSD Mindfulness. This is going to be the last class in this series, and I've just jam-packed it full of lots of really good information since I know this is our last class. So I think you're really going to enjoy it. You might even want to watch it a couple times since there's so much information. So we're going to start out by reviewing what we talked about in the last class. In the last class, we discussed the desires of the fields of the temperamental body. The mental field desires change. Specifically, the mental field wants the ability to make a decision. Decisions usually lead to change. The mental field is interested in change and making decisions because the mental field analyzes options, reflects on the past, and makes projections about the future. It is also creative. Despite all the benefits of using the mental field, when we practice TSD mindfulness, we actually quiet this powerhouse temporarily. The reason is this powerhouse of reflection and simulation and projection actually distracts us from our gut fields and our heart fields. So we need to quiet it so we can not be distracted. Additionally, as powerful as the mental field is, it often misses this really important point. And this really important point is that it's not as important what we are doing, but it's actually oftentimes more important how we are doing it. And the mental field is really focused on what we are doing, not solely, but primarily focused on what we are doing. Our heart field is more focused on how we are doing it. Moving into the heart helps us become conscious of how we are doing what we are doing as opposed to simply what we are doing. The gut field desires preservation. This is quite opposite to the mental field, which desires change. The gut field desires preservation first and foremost to keep us alive. Our gut field is also interested in emotional survival and also concerned with preserving the ego. Emotional and egotistical survival is not always our best interest, however. So, in fact, in some situations, emotional devastation and ego deflation is actually really important to moving into these perfect relationships that we've been talking about in previous classes. So moving on to the heart field desires consideration, and we cannot become attentive in our hearts until we move our consciousness into our heart field. And this movement requires us to tame our mental field and tame our gut fields. Tame our mental field and soothe our gut fields. We need to use devout and steady attention to dwell within our heart. So we need to move the consciousness in there, and then when we're in there, we need to use this devout and steady attention to stay in there. Your attention and surrender in the heart instigates the healing process and the joyful experience. These are two things that your soul wants for you. So that's a review of what we did last class, and now we're going to go and move into the teachings for this class, this final class. The third list on the list, the 3 lists of 3. So when you go to the teachings, we have our 1 list of 1, our 2 lists of 2, and our 3 lists of 3. So we are rounding out the 3 lists of 3 tonight. That third list on the 3 lists of 3 is the products of the temperamental body. The products of the temperamental body. As a reminder, the temperamental body determines your inclinations and your emotions. And the key to becoming ultra mindful of how you develop your inclinations and your emotional responses is in understanding how these 3 fields of the temperamental body operate and what they produce. And so that's what we're going to go over tonight, how they operate and what they produce. It's super important. The mental field operates on logic and reasoning. The mental field's chief responsibility is to gather enough information and send it through a logical process. This logical process is not always correct. We talked about that in previous classes, but it does rely on the logical process. It relies on the if P then Q principle. For example, if an idea is true, then X is also true. If an idea is false, then Y must be true. For example, someone's logic might look like this. There might be a person that sees another person wearing a military uniform and the way their logic has been developed, then they deem that person trustworthy. If a person is wearing military uniform, then they are trustworthy. So this is one example of infinite number of examples of how the logic could work. To better understand how we build our logic over our lifetime, I'd like to go over the information processing model, which comes from psychology. So this is how it works. Stimuli comes into our consciousness, comes into our sensory memory, and some of this stimuli is forgotten, but the stimuli that's not forgotten moves into our working memory. So moves from our sensory memory into our working memory. Some of the stimuli there in this working memory is forgotten, and then if it's not forgotten, then it's processed. And so what that means is it's like you kind of contemplate it, think about it. That's in the working memory, kind of play with it. All right, so when we work with the stimuli in our working memory, then that helps us move it into our long-term memory, but some is lost in the working memory. So those 3 stages goes from the sensory memory to the working memory, and then finally into the long-term memory. Only some of it makes it into the long-term memory. So that's a really simplified version of how we build our logic, but a more comprehensive explanation involves like emotions and how they are associated with events. So it can get pretty complicated, and I'm not going to go into all of that right now. I don't actually understand it completely, to be honest. But hopefully that information processing model kind of gives you the foundation of how this logic is created. This is a simplified version of how logic is built. A more comprehensive explanation involves emotions and how they're associated with the events. But hopefully that simplified version gives you a foundation to help you kind of see how this logic is built in our consciousness. Just as everyone's physical body is different, and their personalities are unique, everyone's logic is individual to them. After relying on logic, the mental field produces decisions about what to spend money on, who to call for guidance, what to have for dinner, and so on. For many of us, our lives are made up of a long stream of decisions, one after another. Some of these decisions are made consciously, and others are just unconscious. Additionally, some decisions are long-standing and serve as our habits. So we've just made this decision, and it's just like whenever we're in a certain situation, this is how we respond. So that would be considered a habit. So I said many of us, our lives are a long string of decisions. But what about the people whose lives are not a long stream of decisions? Are you curious about that? These are the people that rely on divine flow and do not need to make as many decisions. If you are struggling, so I'll just say that again, just not to brush by that too quickly. So some people, they rely on divine flow more, and so they do not need to make as many decisions. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. If you are struggling to make a decision, it is quite possible that your 3 fields of your temperamental body are in conflict with one another. So when you practice TSD mindfulness, it can help you determine which fields are swayed in which direction and which choice is more correct, and even which choice is more divinely guided. If you would like to become more mindful of your own decision process, consider the following questions. All right, first one. What situations are you making decisions about? Just consider that for a moment. What situations are you making decisions about? What type of beliefs about the world are driving those decisions? What type of beliefs about the world, these beliefs that you have, are driving your decisions? Do you avoid making decisions, or do you thrive on making decisions? What are some of the most influential decisions you have ever made in your life? And do you feel that you made these decisions, or were they already made for you? So those are a few questions that will help you get more mindful of your decision process and how your mental field works. Another way to become mindful of your decision process is while meditating, notice any thoughts that come up organically and consider how these thoughts fit into your logic. It is important to note that some decisions are made not based in established logic, but instead on creativity. But just because it's creative does not mean that it's divinely guided. So just because we made a decision based on creativity does not mean that it's divinely guided. It could be, but it could not be. So it's just be careful of that. In addition, some decisions are made on the gut's reactions. These decisions are quick and instinctual. Decisions can also appear to be made from the heart, but these are not technically decisions. And we'll talk more about that. So some of the decisions can be, it'll appear that they are coming from the heart, but they're technically not decisions. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not, we don't need to call it a decision necessarily. All right, so moving on to the gut field. So we've talked about the mental field and how it operates and what it produces. It operates on logic and it produces decision. The second item on the list of the products of the temperamental body is the gut field operates on survival instinct and produces a binary response of preserved and unpreserved. So a reminder, the temperamental body is made up of the mental field, the gut field, and the heart field. And this system determines our inclinations and our emotional responses, which has such a underlying effect on our relationships with everything in our life. So that's why it's really important. And when we understand how these fields operate and what they produce, we better understand how we operate and thus improve our relationships with the people and the things in our lives. The gut field was created to keep us alive. So survival is its chief responsibility. Physical survival is its top priority. But the gut field is also invested in making sure we survive emotionally and egotistically. In other words, the gut field operates to ensure everything is preserved. Okay, this is it's a simplistic. The gut field is simplistic in nature, opposed to the mental field, which is entirely complex and very different from the mental field. Right, the mental field's like really into this change, and the gut field is like into everything staying preserved. The gut field works like an alarm. It sounds off if it senses preservation might be compromised. Okay, so consider the gut field an alarm. The gut field produces two responses. One is all is preserved, meaning we're good. The other is all is not preserved, meaning could mean all you know to be right in the world is going to fall apart. Not always, but that could be the response from the gut field. Or maybe a less intense example would be, this isn't right, something's wrong. The gut field produces a response that is binary. It's either a yes or a no. Yes, do this action, or no, do not do this action. The temperamental body makes these responses apparent in our consciousness in a variety of ways. So the most common way that the gut field makes this alarm apparent is through your body, right? And you're probably all familiar with this, like a pain in your gut, butterflies in your stomach, perhaps a tightness in your stomach. So these are examples of your gut field communicating to you its response, its alarm, its way it's alarming you. But these responses can also be intellectual. The gut field can instigate thoughts in your mental field, since the mental field and the gut field are in relationship. An example might be, a thought that's instigated by the gut field in your mental field could be, I can't do this. The response could also be emotional. For example, a feeling of fear or worry. So the way that your gut field is communicating to you this alarm could happen either through physical sensations, an intellectual, thought, or an emotion. So let's talk about the term gut decision, because that's something that we talk about a lot in our culture. So it's really important in this discussion that we're having about what the gut field creates and how it shares its responses. In the mainstream, the definition of a gut decision is a decision that's based on a hunch and absent of a reasoning process. So I'll say that again. In mainstream, the definition of a gut decision is a decision based on a hunch and absent of any reasoning, right? But this is not to be confused with how our gut field works and what our temperamental body produces. A gut decision, as defined by mainstream, could actually come from the mental field or even the heart field or the gut field. It could come from any of the fields. So in any of our fields, we could make this decision, based on hunch, that kind of idea. Not the heart feels a little bit different. So anyway, only responses that address preservation and change are from the gut field. So a gut decision in TSD mindfulness means that it's about preservation. So that's a different definition. Just want to be really clear about that. So we just talked about the gut field and what the gut field operates on and what it produces. So it operates on survival instinct and it produces this like alarm for us. So now moving into the heart field. So the third term on the list of the products of the temperamental body is the heart field operates on trust and produces emotion. The heart field operates on trust and produces emotion. As discussed earlier, the mental field operates on logic and produces decision, and the gut field operates on survival instinct and produces a binary response of preserved or not preserved. The heart field is quite different from the mental field and the gut fields. For example, the heart field does not weigh options. It does not make projections about what might happen in the future. Or it doesn't make decisions like the mental field does. And nor does the heart field, nor is the heart field overly concerned about survival or alarm us necessarily. Instead, the heart field operates on trust, which is beautiful, yet at the same time it opens us up to emotional, egotistical, and physical pain. With trust comes hurt sometimes, not all the time. So the heart field, operating on trust opens us up to emotional, egotistical, and physical pain. With trust comes hurt sometimes. This is why the mental field paired with our neocortex and the gut field paired with our reptilian complex, so these are both parts of our brain, are part of the system, this temperamental body. The mental field is forever trying to run enough numbers to keep our heart field from being negatively affected. And the gut field is on alert 24/7 on the stakeout, waiting for anything fishy to happen, to notice any fishy activity, to protect us. It's a lot about protection. So this is quite beautiful, right? We have this built-in system keeping us safe. However, it's a big however, relying on the mental and gut fields to keep us safe from hurt is not always our best approach when we're in these situations where we're moving into these perfect relationships with the people and the things in our lives. So relying on the mental and the gut fields to keep us safe from hurt is not always in our best interest when we're moving into these perfect relationships with the people and the things in our lives. Staying safe emotionally, egotistically, and physically is important. We don't want to let go of the security in the heart field, but the heart has an alternative way to keep us safe. So when we're in our heart field, it doesn't mean we're not going to be safe. It just is a different approach. It's a different system that it relies on to keep us safe. So the heart's way of keeping us safe is absent of decision and it's void of any alarms. This alternative approach is surrendering to divine flow and trusting what is next. When we are truly in our hearts, we do not make a single decision because the decisions are already made. I'll say that again. When we are truly in our hearts, we don't make a single decision because the decisions are already made for us. It takes less effort and less energy, leaving us with more time and energy to do the things that we love. With no decisions to make or alarms to tune into, we are left to simply watch the events of our life unfold. So with this approach, we're in our hearts, we're connected to divine flow, we're not relying on our mental field or our gut fields to keep us safe. Instead, we're just simply being there and we're watching the events of our life unfold. One of the reasons this approach is not popular, this is like not popular in our culture, right? Is because your ego plays no role in this process.